I didn't mean to find the notebook. If I had known what it would lead to, I probably would have shoved the entire box back into the cabinet and pretended I never opened it. But at the time, it felt like the most ordinary thing in the world. It was a slow Tuesday afternoon at the office. Half the team had already left for a client visit, and the rest of us were pretending to be productive while waiting for the day to end. Our department had recently moved floors, which meant boxes of old documents were still stacked everywhere like forgotten furniture. My manager asked me to sort through some of them. "Just check if anything important is in there before we throw them out," she said. "Most of it's probably junk." So I took one of the boxes to an empty desk near the window and started going through it. Old reports, outdated client lists, sticky notes with phone numbers nobody would ever call again. Normal office archaeology. At the very bottom of the box, under a pile of folders, I found a thin black notebook. No label, no company logo, just plain. I assumed it was someone's forgotten work notes. Maybe meeting summaries or planning drafts. I almost tossed it straight into the trash pile without opening it. But something about it felt personal. Curiosity got the better of me. I flipped it open. The handwriting immediately told me it wasn't work-related. Messy, slanted, written fast, like someone had been trying to capture thoughts before they disappeared. The first page started mid-sentence. "I saw him again today. I swear he has no idea what he does to the room when he walks in." I frowned slightly. That didn't sound like meeting notes. I turned the page. Levi asked if anyone wanted coffee, and I said yes, even though I'd just had one. I'm pretty sure he noticed I was lying. My name. I blinked, thinking I must have misread it. But there it was again. Levi, written clearly, like the writer had no reason to hide it. My stomach did a small, confused flip. At first I assumed it was coincidence. Levi isn't the rarest name in the world. Maybe it was about someone else. Still, I kept reading. He always pushes his sleeves up when he's thinking. I noticed that today. I notice a lot of things I probably shouldn't. My chest tightened slightly, because that was something people had pointed out before. A dumb habit I didn't even realize I had. I looked around the empty office instinctively, even though no one was watching. Then I turned another page. Harold told me today that Levi seems quiet but observant. I almost laughed. If he knew how much I notice, he'd never say that. I froze. Harold. That definitely wasn't coincidence. Harold sat 3 desks away from me every single day. Same department. Same projects. Same coffee machine. We'd worked together for almost a year. And according to the notebook in my hands, he'd been writing about me. My first instinct was embarrassment. It felt like I'd accidentally opened someone's private thoughts, something I definitely wasn't supposed to see. I almost closed the notebook immediately. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially when your own name is written across multiple pages. I flipped further. Today, Levi stayed late to finish the Henderson report. I pretended I had extra work just so I could stay too. My heart started beating faster now. Not in fear, just confusion. We didn't talk much, just small comments about the spreadsheet. But it was enough. I leaned back in the chair slowly, because suddenly a lot of small moments from the past months started replaying in my head. Harold asking if I needed help with reports even when he clearly had his own work. Harold staying late on days when I stayed late. Harold always sitting in the chair across from mine during team meetings. None of it had seemed strange at the time. Now it felt different. I turned another page. I keep telling myself this is stupid. Levi is just a coworker. A nice one. That's all. Then the next line. But every time he smiles at me like that, I forget the rule I made for myself. My chest tightened. I closed the notebook. For a long moment, I just sat there staring at the black cover resting on my desk. The office air conditioner hummed quietly above me. Everything felt strangely loud, because one thought kept repeating in my head. Harold wrote this. Harold, the quiet, polite guy who spent most meetings listening more than talking. The same Harold who had asked me that morning if I wanted coffee. The same Harold who had laughed when I complained about our clients' impossible deadlines. The same Harold who, according to the notebook now sitting in front of me, had been writing about me for months. I told myself I should put it back. Pretend I never opened it. That would be the respectful thing to do. But instead, I opened it again. And that was the moment everything started to change. I should have stopped reading. That thought crossed my mind at least 5 times while I sat there at the empty desk with Harold's notebook open in front of me. Every page felt like stepping further into something private, something I wasn't meant to see. But every page also had my name. And curiosity kept winning. The next entries were dated from weeks earlier. Harold didn't write every day, but when he did, the entries were long, thoughtful, almost like he was talking to someone who wasn't there, or maybe just to himself. Levi asked me today if I wanted to join him for lunch. I said yes way too quickly. I think he noticed. I tried to remember that moment. It had happened a couple months ago, during a particularly brutal project deadline. Most of the team had been eating at their desks, but I'd suggested getting actual food for once. Harold had looked almost surprised when I asked him. Now I knew why. I kept reading. He talks about the most random things when we eat together. Music, movies, how he hates early morning meetings. I pretend I'm not paying too much attention, but honestly I remember everything. I rubbed the back of my neck, because I had definitely talked about all those things. I flipped another page. Rule number 1, don't make it weird. Rule number 2, don't stare. Rule number 3, don't let Levi figure it out. I actually laughed quietly at that, which made the situation even stranger. Because reading someone's private thoughts about you should feel uncomfortable. And in some ways it did. But it also felt oddly sincere. There was no arrogance in his writing. No assumptions. Just a lot of uncertainty. Another page. Today, Levi helped me fix that stupid formula error in the sales sheet. He leaned over my desk to explain it, and my brain immediately stopped working. I leaned back in my chair again. That moment I remembered very clearly. Harold had been staring at the spreadsheet like it had personally offended him, and I'd leaned over to show him the correct formula. He'd gone completely quiet. At the time I assumed he was just focused. Apparently not. I turned the page, then stopped, because the next entry felt different. Longer. Heavier. Sometimes I wonder if Levi knows. Not about this exactly, but about the way I look at him. He notices things. That's obvious. He probably notices me noticing, but he never acts weird about it. He still talks to me the same way he talks to everyone else. The writing slowed near the bottom of the page, like he'd been thinking carefully about what to say next. That's what makes it harder. My chest tightened slightly. I wasn't sure why. Maybe because I'd always thought of Harold as comfortable background energy in the office. Quiet, but reliable. Easy to work with. I'd never thought about what was happening in his head. The next page made my stomach drop a little. Levi told a story today about getting lost on a road trip in college. He laughed so hard he almost spilled his coffee. I think that's the moment I realized this isn't just a stupid office crush. I stared at the page. Office crush. The words looked simple but heavy at the same time. Then I noticed the final line of that entry. This is probably a terrible idea. I closed the notebook again. This time I leaned forward, elbows on the desk, staring at nothing. Because now the situation had moved from mildly strange to extremely complicated. Harold liked me. Not in a vague, co-worker appreciation way. In a very clear way. And I had discovered it by accident through a notebook he definitely never intended anyone to read. I checked the time. 4:17 p.m. Most of the office was still out at the client visit, which meant they'd probably return in the next 30 minutes. Including Harold. My eyes moved back to the notebook. I had two choices. Option 1. Close it, put it back in the box, and pretend I never saw it. Option 2. I looked down at the last page again. This is probably a terrible idea. The truth was, I had already crossed the line. I'd read enough that pretending ignorance would feel dishonest. Still, I carefully placed the notebook back inside the box and closed the lid. I told myself I would leave it there. Let Harold take it if he noticed it was missing. Let the universe quietly reset the situation. That was the plan. It lasted about 8 minutes. Because at 4:25 p.m. the office door opened, and Harold walked in. He stopped halfway to his desk when he saw me sitting by the window with the open box of files. "Hey, Levi," he said. Completely normal. Completely unaware. "Hey," I replied. For a second, we just looked at each other. Then his eyes moved to the box beside me, and something in his expression changed. Not dramatically, just a flicker, like he had suddenly remembered something important. He walked closer. "What are you doing with those?" he asked casually. "Cleaning out old files," I said. He nodded slowly. Then his eyes scanned the box. I could practically see the moment he realized the notebook was inside it. His shoulders stiffened. Very slightly. "Did you find anything useful?" he asked. And that was the moment my brain stopped cooperating. Because there are moments where you can lie easily, and moments where lying feels impossible. So instead of saying no, I said the worst possible thing. "Harold," I said carefully, "I think I accidentally read something that belongs to you." He froze, completely still. For a long second, he didn't say anything. Then he looked at the box again, then at me. and very quietly asked, "How much did you read?" For a moment, I considered lying, saying I'd only opened the first page, that I closed it immediately when I realized it wasn't work-related, that I didn't really see anything important. But the look on his face made that impossible. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even defensive. He just looked exposed, like someone who had accidentally left a door open and realized too late that someone had walked inside. I took a slow breath. "Enough to realize it was private," I said. That wasn't a full answer. And he noticed. His jaw tightened slightly. His eyes dropped to the box again, like the notebook might somehow disappear if he looked long enough. "You read more than the first page," he said quietly. It wasn't really a question. "No," I admitted. "More than that." Silence filled the space between us. The office felt too quiet now. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above us, and somewhere down the hall a printer started running. Harold rubbed the back of his neck. "That's great," he muttered. He said it like someone commenting on bad weather. I stood up from the chair. "Harold, I didn't go looking for it," I said. "It was just in the box. I thought it was work notes." "I know," he said quickly. Then he forced a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You don't have to explain. I'm the idiot who left it there." He stepped closer to the desk and carefully lifted the notebook out of the box. He held it like it weighed more than paper. "I guess I should have labeled it 'Do Not Open,'" he added. The attempt at humor landed softly and died there. For a second, neither of us moved. Then I said the thing that had been sitting in my chest since page 3. "I didn't know." He looked up immediately. "Know what? That you?" I hesitated. "Felt that way." The words felt strangely heavy to say out loud. Harold stared at me for a long moment. Then he let out a quiet breath and leaned back against the desk beside me. "Well," he said, holding up the notebook slightly. "That was kind of the whole point of the rules." I remembered the page instantly. Rule number 1, don't make it weird. Rule number 2, don't stare. Rule number 3, don't let Levi figure it out. "I guess rule 3 failed," I said. He gave a short laugh. Spectacularly. The tension didn't disappear, but it shifted slightly. Less panic. More awkward honesty. Harold looked down at the notebook again. "I'm sorry you had to read that," he said. That surprised me. "Why are you apologizing?" I asked. "Because now you're stuck knowing something you probably didn't want to know." I opened my mouth to respond, then paused. Because the truth was, I wasn't sure what I had wanted. Before today, Harold had simply been my coworker. Reliable, smart, quiet in meetings, but surprisingly funny in one-on-one conversations. Now there was an entire hidden layer of meaning under every interaction we'd ever had. It was a lot to process. "I don't feel stuck," I said finally. He looked at me, clearly skeptical. No. I leaned back against the desk across from him. "What I feel is surprised." "That's fair," he admitted, and a little confused. "Also fair. And curious." That made him blink. "Curious?" I shrugged slightly. "Your notebook makes it sound like you've been analyzing my coffee habits like a scientist." He laughed again, this time more genuine. "Unfortunately accurate." "Which means," I continued, "you've probably noticed things about me I haven't even noticed." Harold shook his head slowly. "You're taking this way better than I expected." "What were you expecting?" He thought about that for a moment. "Honestly," he said, "you pretending you didn't read it, and then slowly avoiding me forever." I frowned slightly. "Is that what you would have done?" "Probably." I considered that. Then I said something that surprised both of us. "I'm glad I read it." His head snapped up. "You are?" "Yeah." He studied my face carefully, like he was trying to determine if I was joking. "I basically just handed you a written record of my most embarrassing thoughts," he said. "I've seen worse," I replied. "Where?" "College group chats." That got a real laugh out of him. For a moment, the tension eased completely. But then he glanced at the notebook again. His expression softened into something more serious. "You know you don't have to say anything about it," he said quietly. I wasn't planning to ever bring it up. I figured. It was just easier to put it somewhere. The way he said it made something in my chest shift. Because the entries hadn't sounded dramatic or obsessive. They sounded like someone trying very hard to manage their own feelings. "I don't think it's embarrassing," I said. He looked skeptical again. "You read the part where I stayed late at work just to sit near you, right?" "Yes." "And the part where I wrote 3 paragraphs about you pushing your sleeves up?" "Yes." "And you still don't think that's embarrassing?" I shrugged slightly. "I think it's honest." He went quiet. Really quiet. Like that word had landed somewhere he hadn't expected. Finally, he said, "You're being really nice about this." "I'm being honest." Harold studied me again. And then, after a long pause, he asked something carefully. So what happens now? The question hung there between us. Because the truth was, I hadn't thought that far ahead yet. All I knew was that the quiet coworker who sat 3 desks away from me suddenly felt like someone I didn't fully know anymore. And strangely, I wanted to. Harold's question stayed between us. So what happens now? The honest answer was, I had no idea. A few hours ago, Harold had simply been the quiet guy who helped double-check spreadsheets and occasionally complained about the coffee machine. Now I knew he had an entire notebook filled with thoughts about me. And somehow, the world hadn't exploded. I rubbed the back of my neck. I guess we go back to work, I said. Harold blinked. That's your big plan? It's 4:40, and we still have a report due tomorrow. He stared at me for a second, then laughed under his breath. You're unbelievably calm about this. I'm not calm, I said. I'm just trying not to make it weird. He raised the notebook slightly. I literally wrote a rule about that. Rule number 1, I said. His eyebrows lifted. You really did read a lot. I gave him a small, guilty smile. Yeah. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Harold straightened and walked toward his desk, setting the notebook carefully inside his bag like it was something fragile. I returned to the box of files, mostly to give my hands something to do. The office slowly filled again as the rest of the team came back from the client meeting. Chairs rolled across the floor. Conversation started. Someone complained loudly about traffic. Normal noise. But the space between Harold and me felt completely different now. At one point, I looked up from the paperwork and caught him glancing in my direction. He quickly looked back at his computer. That alone told me something. Because Harold wasn't usually that obvious about anything. Around 6, people started packing up to leave. I shut down my laptop and grabbed my jacket. When I turned toward the exit, Harold was standing near the door, waiting for the elevator. For a second, we just looked at each other. Then he said, So, this is the part where we awkwardly pretend nothing happened, right? Is that the standard procedure? That was my original plan. And now, he hesitated. I'm open to better ideas. The elevator dinged. We stepped inside together. The doors closed, and suddenly we were alone in the quiet metal box. Harold leaned against the wall and folded his arms. You know what the worst part is? He said. What? You didn't even read the most embarrassing entry. I turned toward him. There's worse. Oh, much worse. That's impressive. He shook his head, smiling faintly. There's one where I tried to write an entire list of reasons why having a crush on a coworker is a terrible idea. And it was 12 reasons long. Sounds thorough. The last line just says, Unfortunately, Levi exists. I laughed before I could stop myself. The sound echoed slightly inside the elevator. Harold looked at me, and something softened in his expression. That reaction alone was worth the humiliation, he said. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened, but neither of us stepped out immediately. Can I ask you something? He said. Sure. Be honest. Okay. He took a breath. Did anything in that notebook make you uncomfortable? The question was careful, serious, and I understood why he was asking. I thought about it. About the entries. About the quiet, thoughtful way he had written about things most people would never even admit out loud. Then I shook my head. No. Relief crossed his face so quickly he probably didn't realize it. Good, he said quietly. We walked outside together. The evening air was cool, the street busy with people heading home. For a minute we stood on the sidewalk without speaking. Then Harold said, You know, I spent months making sure you never figured any of that out. I can tell. And you discovered it by accident in under 10 minutes. Technically 8. He sighed. Incredible. I hesitated for a moment. Then I said something that had been sitting in my head since earlier. You asked what happens now. He nodded. Yeah. I looked at him. What if we just talk? About what? About the fact that apparently you've been studying my coffee habits for months. He laughed. That's not a fair summary. It's a little fair. Harold looked at me for a long moment. You're serious? Yeah. He seemed surprised. Why? Because now I'm curious about something. What? I shrugged slightly. What made you start writing about me in the first place? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. And for the first time since this whole thing started, Harold actually looked nervous. Are you sure you want that answer? He asked quietly. I nodded. Yeah, I asked. He looked down the street for a moment, like he was deciding how honest he wanted to be. Cars passed, headlights sliding across the pavement. The office building behind us slowly emptied. Then he exhaled. Okay, he said, but you can't laugh. No promises. That's already a bad start. I smiled slightly. Go on. Harold rubbed the back of his neck, clearly buying himself a few seconds. It started with a meeting, he said. That's not very romantic. I never claimed it was. He leaned against the metal railing by the building entrance. Remember the quarterly planning meeting last winter? I tried to recall. That one lasted 3 hours. Exactly. The one where the projector stopped working twice? Yes. And our manager kept saying, circle back every 5 minutes? Harold pointed at me. That one. I laughed quietly. Okay, I remember it. He nodded. You were sitting across the table from me. And at some point, everyone started arguing about the budget projections. That sounded about right. Most of our meetings ended up like that. I wasn't paying attention anymore, he continued. I was just waiting for it to end. And you started doodling on the corner of your notebook. I frowned. I doodle a lot. I noticed. You wrote tiny stick figures fighting each other. I blinked. What? He nodded seriously. You labeled them marketing and reality. I stared at him. You saw that? Of course I saw it. That was supposed to be subtle. It wasn't. I laughed again, shaking my head. So that's when you started writing diary entries about me? Not exactly. He looked down at his hands for a moment. That was just the first time I noticed you differently. The way he said it was simple. No drama. No exaggeration. Just honest. What do you mean? I asked. Harold thought for a second before answering. You didn't try to impress anyone in that meeting, he said. You weren't trying to sound smarter than everyone else. You were just there. That sounds like a very low bar. You'd be surprised. He continued. Most people in this office are performing all the time, trying to look confident, important, busy, and I wasn't. You were drawing tiny stick figure battles. Fair point. He smiled faintly. And when the meeting finally ended, you walked past me and said, if I hear the phrase synergy opportunity one more time, I'm quitting. I groaned. Oh no, I did say that. You did. And you laughed like it was the funniest thing you'd heard all week. I shook my head. That's a terrible origin story. It gets worse. Great. He crossed his arms. After that I started noticing things. Like the sleeve thing. Yeah. And the coffee thing. Yes. And apparently my road trip stories. Those are very detailed stories. I studied him for a moment. You remember a lot. Harold gave a small shrug. That's kind of the problem. For a second the conversation slowed. The evening air felt quieter now. Then I asked something that had been on my mind since the beginning. Why write it down? He hesitated. Because I didn't want it to affect how I treated you. That's surprisingly responsible. I tried to keep it contained, he said. Contained. In the notebook. I smiled slightly. So that was the containment strategy. Exactly. And it worked. For a while. What changed? He looked at me. Really looked this time. You started sitting next to me more. I blinked. I thought you moved your chair closer. Nope. That might explain a lot. We both laughed softly. But then the moment settled again. Harold shifted his weight against the railing. You know the funny part? He said. What? I always assumed you'd never notice. Why? He looked genuinely confused by the question. Levi, you're friendly with everyone. So I figured I was just another coworker. Something about the way he said that didn't sit right with me. Because in my head, Harold had never been just another coworker. He was the person who stayed late when projects got stressful. The person who caught mistakes in reports before anyone else did. The person who always remembered everyone's coffee orders. I just hadn't thought about him the way he thought about me. Until now. You weren't just another coworker, I said. He looked surprised. No. Then what was I? I thought about that. Then I answered honestly. The person I trusted the most on our team. His expression changed slightly at that. Not dramatic, but softer. I didn't expect that answer, he said. I didn't expect your notebook. That's fair. For a moment we both just stood there. Then Harold glanced down the street. I should probably head home, he said. Before this conversation gets even more surreal. I nodded. Probably. But neither of us moved right away. Finally, he said something quieter. You know, if you ever want to forget this whole thing, I'll understand. I looked at him. Why would I want to forget it? He shrugged. Because it complicates things. Maybe. And complicated office dynamics are usually a bad idea. Also true. So, he waited. I thought about the notebook again. About the careful observations. About the honesty in those pages. Then I said something that surprised both of us. Harold, yeah, what if we get coffee tomorrow? He blinked. We get coffee every morning. I mean, just us. A small pause. Oh, yes, oh. He looked genuinely stunned for a second. Then a slow smile appeared. You know what, he said. What? That might be the first time rule number 3 has ever worked in my favor. And for the first time since I found that notebook. The situation didn't feel complicated. It felt like the beginning of something. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual. Not because of an alarm, just because my brain refused to stay asleep. The first thing I thought about was the notebook. The second thing was Harold's face when I asked him to get coffee. I stared at the ceiling for a minute before sitting up. Yesterday had been strange, but not in a bad way. Just unexpected. Harold had always been in the background of my workdays, reliable, calm, easy to talk to. Now, every small interaction from the past year felt different when I replayed it. I eventually gave up on trying to sleep again and got ready for work. When I walked into the office kitchen around 8:20, Harold was already there, which didn't surprise me. What surprised me was that he looked just as nervous as I felt. He was standing by the coffee machine staring at it like it had personally offended him. Morning, I said. He turned immediately. Hey. For a second we just stood there. Then he held up 2 cups. I wasn't sure if yesterday still counted today, he said. What? The coffee invitation. I walked over and took one of the cups. I meant it. Good, he said. Then after a short pause he added, because I spent 20 minutes trying to decide if I imagined that part. I smiled. Nope. Real. The office slowly began filling up around us. People arriving, keyboards starting up, chairs rolling across the floor. Harold glanced toward the main work area, then back at me. So, where exactly are we going for this coffee, he asked. I tilted my head. There's a place down the street. During work hours? Yes. That feels illegal. It's called a break. Suspicious concept. I laughed and gestured toward the door. Come on. 5 minutes later, we were walking down the street together. The morning air was cool, the sidewalks busy with commuters. Neither of us spoke for the first minute. Finally, Harold said, You know what's weird? What? This is the first time we've left the office together. I thought about that. He was right. We had worked together for almost a year, but all of our conversations had happened inside that building. Yeah, I said. That is weird. We reached the small cafe on the corner and stepped inside. It was quiet, just a few people sitting by the windows. We ordered our drinks and sat at a table near the back. For a moment, we both focused very hard on our coffee cups. Then Harold said, Okay, I have to ask. Ask what? Why did you invite me here? I raised an eyebrow. You mean besides the coffee? Yes. He leaned forward slightly. Because yesterday could have easily ended with you pretending none of that happened. I know. So why didn't you? I considered the question, then answered honestly. Because the notebook didn't make me uncomfortable. I'm still surprised by that. It made me curious. About what? About you. He looked genuinely confused. You already know me. Not really. Levi, we've worked together for months. Exactly. He frowned slightly. That doesn't explain anything. I leaned back in my chair. Your notebook made it sound like you've been observing me like a science project. Not my proudest phrasing, but I realized something reading it. What? I've never actually asked you many questions. Harold blinked. You're serious? Yeah. He thought about it. Okay, that's actually true. We mostly talk about work. And occasionally terrible meetings. Exactly. So this, I gestured around the cafe, is me fixing that. He stared at me for a moment, then slowly smiled. That might be the most unexpected outcome of my humiliating diary discovery. You're calling it humiliating a lot. Because it is. I still disagree. He studied me again. You're very calm about all of this. I'm processing. How? By asking questions. All right, he said, sitting back. Ask. I thought for a moment. Then asked the first thing that came to mind. Why didn't you ever say anything? He didn't hesitate. Because I didn't want to make things uncomfortable for you. That's considerate. And selfish. How? Because it was easier to keep it quiet. I nodded slowly. That makes sense. Then I asked another question. Have you ever written about anyone else like that? He laughed immediately. No. So I'm the first? Yes. Wow. That's not something to sound proud about. I'm just surprised. Why? Because it means you must have thought about this a lot. He gave me a look. I filled an entire notebook. Right. We both laughed softly. Then the conversation slowed again. Harold traced the rim of his coffee cup with his finger. You know something? He said. What? I was completely prepared for you to reject me yesterday. I looked at him. Reject you? Yeah. That would have been dramatic. I prepared several speeches. You had speeches? 3. Wow. Version 2 involved me transferring to another department. I laughed. That seems extreme. It felt realistic at the time. The way he said it made me realize something. Harold had genuinely expected things to go badly. And instead, we were sitting in a cafe together at 9 in the morning. Harold, I said. Yeah. I'm glad you didn't transfer departments. He smiled slightly. Me too. Then after a small pause, he added quietly. You know what the strange part is? What? This already feels different. How? He looked at me. Because now I don't have to pretend I'm not paying attention to you. I smiled. Good. He raised an eyebrow. Why good? Because now I get to pay attention to you too. That made him freeze for a second. And I realized something right then. The notebook might have started this conversation. But what happened next wasn't written in it. The strange thing about that morning coffee wasn't the conversation. It was how normal everything suddenly felt. Not awkward. Not tense. Just new. When we walked back to the office, Harold held the door open for me like he always did. People were already deep into work again. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, someone arguing with IT about a password reset. Our desks were exactly where they'd always been. 3 seats apart. But now there was this invisible thread between them. I sat down and opened my laptop. Harold did the same. For the next 20 minutes, we worked quietly, the way we had hundreds of times before. Except now, every once in a while I caught him glancing up. Not quickly hiding it anymore. Just looking. And when our eyes met, he didn't immediately look away. Around 10:30, our manager walked over. Status update on the Henderson report? She asked. Harold and I both started explaining at the same time. We stopped, looked at each other. Then he gestured toward me. You go. I finished the explanation while he nodded along, occasionally adding small details. Normal teamwork. But when our manager walked away, Harold leaned slightly toward me. You know what's funny? He murmured. What? Yesterday morning I was writing about you in a notebook. And today? Today we're whispering during budget reports. I smiled. Big life changes. He laughed under his breath. The rest of the morning passed quickly. Meetings, emails, spreadsheets, the usual rhythm of office life. But something had shifted. Around noon, a few coworkers started discussing lunch plans near the break area. Burgers, someone suggested. Too far. Salads. Absolutely not. I heard Harold quietly say from behind his screen, tragic debate. I turned in my chair. Do you already have lunch plans? He hesitated. No. Good. Why? Because you're coming with me. His eyebrows lifted. That sounds suspiciously confident. You had 12 reasons in your notebook explaining why liking a coworker is a bad idea. Correct. And yet you still did. That is unfortunately true. So statistically speaking, I said, standing up and grabbing my jacket, you're clearly bad at resisting bad ideas. He stared at me, then slowly smiled. That's a dangerous argument. Come on. A minute later we were outside again, walking the same street as that morning. Except this time the conversation felt easier. Less careful. So, Harold said after a few minutes, have you always been this confident? About what? Inviting people to lunch after discovering their secret feelings. I laughed. I'm improvising. You're doing surprisingly well. You should see my college presentations. Were they chaotic? Extremely. We reached a small sandwich place and ordered food. A few minutes later we sat near the window with our trays. Harold leaned back in his chair. You know something? He said. What? This is the longest conversation we've ever had that isn't about work. That's kind of sad. It really is. He looked thoughtful for a moment, then asked quietly, can I ask you something now? Sure. Did reading the notebook change how you see me? The question was careful, important. I didn't answer immediately, because I wanted to be honest. Yes, I said. He looked down at the table. Good change or bad change? Different change. That's not reassuring. It's not bad. He waited. I continued. Before yesterday, I thought of you as the most reliable person in our office. That's a very office compliment. I'm not finished. He looked up. Now I think you're also braver than I realized. His expression shifted slightly. Braver? You wrote down things most people wouldn't even admit to themselves. That wasn't bravery. That was panic management. It was honesty. He went quiet. Really quiet. Then he said softly, "You're making it sound nicer than it felt." Maybe. We ate for a minute in comfortable silence. Then Harold suddenly smiled. "You know what the weirdest part of all this is?" "What?" "You're the one asking me out to lunch." I raised an eyebrow. "You asked me out first." "When?" "In a notebook." He laughed out loud. "That doesn't count." "I disagree." "Well," he said, leaning forward slightly, "if that counts." "Yeah. Then technically this is our second date." I stared at him, then laughed. "Wow. What? You moved fast." "I had months of planning." "Inside a notebook." "Exactly." The conversation faded into comfortable quiet again. Outside the window, people walked past. Cars moved through the street. The normal rhythm of the city continued. Inside the cafe, something felt calm. Easy. Eventually, we finished eating and stood to leave. As we stepped outside, Harold said something quietly. "You know, yesterday morning I thought finding that notebook would be the worst possible scenario. And now," he looked at me. Now he didn't hesitate when our eyes met. "Now I'm pretty sure it was the best accident that could have happened." We stood there for a second longer than necessary. Then we both started walking back to the office. And for the first time since all of this started, neither of us was wondering what would happen next, because it already had. It's strange how quickly something new can become normal. A few weeks after I found the notebook, Harold and I had fallen into a rhythm that didn't feel forced anymore. The office still looked the same desks, same endless spreadsheets, same terrible coffee machine that groaned every time someone used it. But the way we moved through those days had changed. For one thing, we stopped pretending we didn't choose to sit near each other in meetings. That had become obvious pretty quickly. "Coincidence," Harold had said the first time someone pointed it out. "Total coincidence," I agreed. No one believed us. Another thing that changed was lunch. At first it had been occasional, the two of us stepping out to grab food somewhere nearby. Then it slowly turned into a habit. By the third week, one of our coworkers finally said what everyone had clearly noticed. "You two eat together a lot," she said casually. Harold looked at me. I looked at him. Then he shrugged. "We like sandwiches," he said. That explanation somehow satisfied everyone. But the real change wasn't the lunches. It was the quiet moments in between. The small conversations that used to stay on the surface had started drifting deeper. We talked about where we grew up, terrible college jobs, random fears about the future, and sometimes about the notebook. One evening, about a month after everything started, we stayed late finishing a project. The office was almost empty, just the soft hum of lights and the occasional elevator sound in the distance. I was reviewing numbers when Harold rolled his chair over beside mine. "Can I confess something?" he asked. "That depends," I said. "Is this another notebook revelation?" "Sort of." I turned toward him. "What?" He leaned his elbows on the desk. "I stopped writing in it." "Why?" He smiled slightly. "Because I don't need to anymore." That answer stayed with me for a moment. "You used it to sort out your thoughts," I said. "Exactly. And now?" He looked at me. "Now I just talk to you." Something warm settled quietly in my chest. After a moment I asked, "Do you miss it?" "The notebook?" "Yeah." He thought about that. "Not really." "Why?" "Because the whole reason I wrote those entries was to deal with feelings I couldn't say out loud." He gestured between us. "And now I don't have that problem." We sat there in the quiet office for a moment. Then I said something that had been in the back of my mind for a while. "You know what I never told you?" "What?" "When I first read the notebook, I thought it would make everything awkward." "Same." "But it didn't." "No," he agreed. "Why do you think that is?" Harold smiled softly. "Because the feelings were already there." "For you." "For me," he said. Then after a small pause he added, "And maybe a little for you too. You just didn't know it yet." I leaned back in my chair. "Maybe." He looked at me like he was trying to read something behind that answer. But he didn't push. That was something I'd learned about Harold. He noticed everything, but he never forced anything. Eventually we packed up our things and left the office together. Outside, the evening air felt calm, the city quieter than usual. We walked toward the subway entrance like we had started doing most nights. Halfway there, Harold stopped. I turned. "What?" He looked slightly nervous in a way I hadn't seen since the day I found the notebook. "Can I say something a little embarrassing?" he asked. "After everything I read, I think we're past that." "Fair point." He took a breath. "When you found that notebook, I thought it would ruin everything." "Why?" "Because you'd finally see exactly how much I noticed about you. And I thought it might scare you away." I shook my head. "It didn't." "No," he said quietly. Then he smiled a little. If anything, it did the opposite. We stood there for a moment, the city moving around us. Then I said something I had been thinking about for days. You know what the funniest part of this whole story is? What? You spent months writing about me in secret. Unfortunately true. And in the end, what? The only reason I ever knew was because you forgot to take your notebook home. He laughed. A historic mistake. The best one you ever made. He looked at me for a moment longer than usual. Then he said something softly. Yeah. We continued walking toward the subway, our shoulders brushing occasionally as the sidewalk narrowed. And as we disappeared into the evening crowd, I realized something. Some love stories start with a grand moment. Others start quietly, with a forgotten notebook, and the courage to ask what happens next.